Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Facebook Live event. We're going to get started here in just a minute. It looks like we are probably ready to go, but I am just going to wait for that official go. It looks like we're good. So hello again, and thank you so much for joining us. I do want to let you know that if you need closed captioning, please turn that on in the bottom right-hand corner of the video. So I'm Marcy with Disability Hub, and here at Disability Hub MN, we do really understand the importance of mental wellness. And we are proud to celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And today we've invited Sue Abder-Holden, who is the Executive Director of NAMI Minnesota, to have a conversation with us about why mental health matters and the sports that NAMI offers to all of Minnesotans. So again, I'm Marcy with the Disability Hub. But before we jump into our conversation with Sue, again, a couple of things for you to know about today's event. We will be taking questions in the comments. So throughout our presentation, once we open up for questions, feel free to add any questions or comments. And we promise we'll get to them, as many of them as we can. And during the event, we'll also be putting links to information in those comments. And a reminder again, if you do need closed captioning, please turn them on in the bottom right-hand corner of the video. And if captioning for some reason is not working for you today, or it's not working right at any specific time, we will be re-uploading this video with embedded captions to make it accessible for everyone as much as we can. And we'll also, we could also provide a full transcript of this video once it's published. I do want to, although we're taking questions and comments, please don't ask specific questions to you that include your personal information. This is a live public event, and we want to do everything that we can to keep your personal information protected and private. If you do have a specific question that you'd like addressed regarding your personal needs, please reach out to NAMI, or you can send an email to the hub, or you can chat or contact the hub via phone. So I think we're ready to begin. Welcome, Sue, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to have a conversation.
Thanks so much, Marcy, for inviting me this morning. So May is Mental Health Month, so it's a really good time to talk about mental wellness, but also to make sure that people understand mental illnesses. So about 1 in 5 people, including children and adults, are impacted by mental illness. The most common mental illness is anxiety, about 18% of the population, followed by depression. But we also know of other mental illnesses, including, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, postpartum depression, PTSD, eating disorders. I mean, there are quite a few. And again, it's extremely common. Unfortunately, people wait about 10 years before they seek treatment. Even something like schizophrenia, where you are, hearing voices, having delusional thoughts, those young people wait about 18 months, which, as all of you know, for any type of healthcare condition, early identification and intervention, produces the best results. And some of the reasons people don't seek out help is, one is, I don't really like to use the word stigma anymore. It really is people are afraid of discrimination. So if they share that they're struggling, will that mean they'll lose their job? Will that mean they won't get raises in the future? Will people be afraid of them? All of those kinds of things. And the other thing to think about is just our language around mental illness also impacts us as well. So you all know in the disability rights movement, right, we moved away from using the R word. We moved to people first language, right, people with disabilities, so it doesn't define them. But when you talk about mental illness, let's think of all the slang words that exist. Crazy, psycho, nuts. There's a ton of them. But what are the slang words for other healthcare conditions? They don't exist. Diabetes, cancer, heart disease. And any civil and human rights movement, right, takes over their language, right? I mean, I'm old enough that when I went into the workforce, we were called girls. We don't talk about grown women, adult women in that way anymore. And again, there's other language that we've changed. And so just even for today, I'd like people to think about how many times they hear the word crazy. You will be amazed. And just think about a young person, again, maybe hearing voices, who is afraid to share or to seek out help because people are going to think he or she is crazy. And so language really is an important piece in all of this, especially during Mental Health Awareness Month. We want to make people aware that language matters. Language hurts, but language can also, go in the right way. When we think about mental illnesses, some of the symptoms that you might see is actually people being overly emotional, right? Crying, anger, all of those kinds of things can be symptoms. Difficulty concentrating. Depression actually has a real huge impact on that. And so it can make it hard for people to be successful at work or at home. In the workplace, you might see people being late all the time because they're not sleeping well, or the medications makes it hard for people to get up. And then changes in stamina or pace, and really losing interest in the things that you like to do before. It's particularly important for teenagers. So if you see that they're starting to back away from, whether it's sports or music or whatever, you want to be concerned about that. And then because our head is actually connected to the rest of our body, there are physical symptoms as well. Things like stomach aches, headaches, feeling your heart racing, those kinds of things are also symptoms of an emerging mental illness. Now that you kind of know those, kind of major symptoms and illnesses, I just want to talk about the impact of the pandemic on, frankly, everybody's mental health. And if I can find a silver lining in the pandemic, it would be two things. One, that perhaps there'll be more compassion and empathy towards people experiencing depression and anxiety, because I would bet that most of us have had a day or two or a week with anxiety or depression. We can't not have felt those things during this time. And I think the other thing is that perhaps there was more time to connect to other individuals, even within your own home. The suicide rate actually went down in 2020 in Minnesota. And we think part of it was that people were with others. They weren't necessarily within their family alone as much. Not that isolation wasn't an issue, it is, but I think that's one of the things. Families had dinners together because there was nowhere else for people to go. So thinking about the pandemic, we were living with great uncertainty, right? We had no idea when this was going to end. We couldn't plan ahead at all. And while certainly there's, no certainty in life, right? We still made plans. We couldn't make plans during the pandemic. And that's really hard to live with that kind of uncertainty. People worried, especially essential workers, right? They worried about catching COVID, perhaps infecting family members. And so that created anxiety as well. We had people that were alone and isolated. And if you were living alone and not coming into contact with others, that can be a really difficult place. But also, we're not used to being together with our families 24/7. And that created its own stresses, right? Because we're just not used to that. We had people who lost their jobs and income, and so they were worrying about bills and, what happens when the eviction moratorium goes away. Will they lose their housing? Those kinds of things. And then there is what I would call ambiguous loss or grief. And it's something that we haven't really talked about as much as we should. So if you think about teenagers last year not having graduations, not having graduation parties, something that they looked forward to for years. People didn't have their sports tournaments and their music concerts. People had to postpone or really limit the number of people who attended their weddings, right? Grandparents missing out on the first birthday of their grandchildren. And then even funerals. A lot more people died this past year, and we couldn't hold funerals. Part of the grieving process is actually coming together, breaking bread together, crying, laughing, telling stories about the individual. And that really actually helps us in that grieving process. We didn't have that. Very few funerals were really held where people could really come together. And then we had parents who were trying to work and do distance learning with their children. And if their child was receiving special education, perhaps they had a paraprofessional for part of the day or the whole day, that paraprofessional was not in their home. And so they're sitting there trying to, have an adapted curriculum, and they have no idea what they're doing. And, there were a lot of children who just would not engage in distance learning as well. There were some children who did better because they weren't being bullied or feeling different at school, and they actually thrived during this time. But there were a lot of children who really struggled during this time. And if you had someone that you were supporting, perhaps it was an elderly relative, a person with a disability or a mental illness, that made it hard too, because you worried about interacting with them, but yet they needed support. And often the supports that they did have in place disappeared, especially during the early time of the pandemic. We also really have to say that working from home was really not great for a lot of people. You're not set up ergonomically in your home. I mean, you're just not if hadn't been working from home the whole time, right? And Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So when you're in a meeting with with a group, you're looking at maybe two, at the most three people at one time, trying to assess their body language and their emotions on their face and how they're reacting to you. Looking at a screen with 12 or 15 or 18 people is really kind of a deluge of information into your brain that you can't really take. And so Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And if you didn't have a large home, you had, two parents or two adults trying to work from the kitchen table, kids trying to do distance learning, not really the best setup. And again, it can be kind of isolating to do that. So I think we just need to kind of understand that the pandemic really had huge stressors on all of us. And I do want to say that while we were all in the same ocean, we were not in the same boat. And so COVID and the pandemic really hit communities differently and disproportionately. So we know that people from the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, actually caught COVID at a higher rate, were hospitalized at a higher rate, and died at a higher rate. You add in George Floyd's murder, that added additional trauma to those communities. And then for people who are Asian being attacked in grocery stores and parking lots and being blamed for the pandemic. And so those communities actually have had it, frankly, even worse during this time. And I think it's important to just acknowledge that. And so all that stress has really made us not feel great during this time. And so we've really been trying to push people to do those kind of mental wellness activities that can really help. And they're very simple, honestly. Some is just breathing, so when you start feeling that anxiety come up, you inhale to 4 and you exhale to 6. And you make a whooshing sound when you do that. And that might seem really silly. I've done it in the elevator to my office when I'm starting to feel really stressed because there's been, frankly, a lot more calls to our office, people really needing help during this time. And so it's just like, I'm just going to breathe in for 4, I'm going to breathe out for 6. Moving gets the endorphins going in your brain, which actually will help you feel better. So whether it's dancing in the kitchen with your kids, looking foolish, taking a walk around the block, all of those kinds of things can really help. Watching nutrition. I think a lot of people have, eaten comfort food during this time, right? And that's to be expected, but we really need to bring in some more fruits and vegetables into our diet. And another thing that's been joked about a lot, especially on social media, is alcohol. Alcohol use is way up, and alcohol is actually a depressant. And so it's really not a good thing if you're already starting to feel depressed. Giving back and volunteering, which has been hard during this time, but you can write notes to people. You can send, we had little kids sending pictures into nursing homes when they were kind of shut down in isolation. I had a friend who actually sent postcards to everyone every month, and it was delightful to get them. And he felt good about it because he knows he was reaching out to people. And I felt good about getting something other than a bill in the mail. It was really nice. And so looking at those kinds of things can be helpful too. And then the other thing I would say is giving ourselves kind of the permission to not be perfect during this time, whether it's at work or at home. I had some younger friends, who have, children who are school age. When the pandemic first hit, they were like, okay, I took French in college. I'm going to teach my kids French and we're going to make quiche on this day and all this kind of stuff. By the end of the week, they were like, oh my gosh, no. And I'm like, we're just going to get through this. Getting through this is actually an accomplishment. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have rearranged your closets and done, home improvement projects. It's okay. You made it through, and that's all that really matters. And the other thing we need to do is change our brains and how we're thinking about this. So initially when this happened, everyone was kind of like, yep, we got this, right? It'll be over in May. And then April came. We're like, oh, it's not going to be over at all. And so we thought it was going to be a sprint when actually it was going to be a marathon of undefined miles. And so when you kind of change your thinking about that, it's like, I'm just going to think about today. I'm not going to think about the future. That actually kind of calms down your anxiety as well. And then last is what I would call grace and space. So we have all been through unprecedented times. It has really been difficult for so many people. And when life is difficult, we're not always at our best. I mean, we just aren't. And so we have to give people grace and space. So I'm not going to yell at the person who cuts in line because they can't see that actually we're 6 feet apart. And so they cut in, right? I'm going to give them that space to just do that. Somebody who yells at me, yelling back doesn't really make you feel any better. And so I'm going to give them grace and space because I hope that somebody gives that to me when I'm feeling particularly crabby some morning. So do the grace and space. And I think that just helps us as individuals and frankly, as a community as well. So kind of please keep those kind of mental wellness activities in mind because that's the only way we're going to get through this. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but I also want to remind people that just because the pandemic's coming, we hope to an end, doesn't mean that instantly we're going to feel better. So to think that children going back into school, now it's all going to be okay, it's not. They have been through a year, more than a year of a traumatic experience, and they don't all have tools in their toolbox to handle this. So we need to focus not necessarily on academics, but social emotional skills during this time. And even as adults, people are worried about going back to the office. They're worried about not wearing a mask someplace, right? And so we just, again, have to remember this is going to be a process to get over this and not just when the doors open up. Now, what NAMI does that perhaps could be helpful to you is we offer a lot of free classes, and we've done a lot during the pandemic as well. We've worked with a lot of employers during this time. I've never seen employers so concerned about their employees' mental health. And so we have a class that we give, Minding Your Mental Health During COVID, that kind of goes through helping people understand why the pandemic hit us in terms of our mental health, and then things that you can do. And it includes suicide prevention activities in there as well. We offer during the pre-COVID mental health in the workplace to help employers understand what those accommodations are for a mental illness, but those accommodations could actually be helpful now as people start coming back to work. We have classes for family members so that they can understand how to help their loved ones. We have all the suicide prevention classes, which I think most people are worried that the suicide rates actually go up in 2021. People are like, well, but we're coming to the end. But I think that a lot of people held it in and now just can't. People who had a mental illness before the pandemic, they lost their traditional way of treatment and services and supports. And what we're seeing, particularly among children who had a mental illness before the pandemic, is that they are in full-blown crisis right now. They could make it 6 months, 9 months, right? But now they can't. And that's why you're seeing stories in the news about children languishing in the emergency room, because the need for them to get really a higher level of care is just great. And just opening back up isn't going to do it for them. They need much more right now. So we have classes for families of children as well. We have a helpline. We take over 4,000 calls a year, and our numbers are way up right now. People trying to navigate the system. We've had a lot of families call of young adults who are home from college who are experiencing symptoms of psychosis. That's a huge increase, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country. So we want to be there for those families as well. We have peer-led support groups. So we have ones for people with mental illnesses, ones for families, ones for parents of children. We have specific ones for the BIPOC community and for the LGBTQ community to make sure people have a safe space. And there is something about sharing that journey with someone that can be so helpful. So I have family members. And so when I talk to someone else who's a family member, they understand right immediately what I'm going through. And I understand what they're going through. And so those support groups can be really helpful. Sorry. And then lastly, we have a lot of free materials on our website. So we have booklets that help you understand, what's the Commitment Act? How do I navigate the adult mental health system or the children's mental health system? What does it mean when you're hospitalized for psychiatric care, either for a child or an adult? What about developing a crisis plan so that you're really prepared in the future? All of those booklets are on our website, and those again can be really helpful for people. So I think I'll stop there to see if there are any questions. But again, I just want to remind people that we are having a normal reaction to an abnormal world. And we have to recognize that, and we have to put into place those strategies that will help us continue to get through this time in our lives.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Sue. My brain is overwhelmed with just the plethora of information that you've just shared, because you gave us ways to think about things that I hadn't thought of in that way yet. So thank you so much for that. Um, Now, you and I had talked a little bit earlier, before we went live, about recognizing mental illness as a disability. And here at the Hub, you don't have to be a person with a disability to utilize our services. How, when we're supporting people with mental illness, whether at the Hub or in our community or in our families, we talk that sometimes people don't see mental illness as a disability. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, Marcy, thanks for raising that. So a lot of people with mental illness actually don't consider themselves having a disability because they believe in recovery. They believe people can get better. But for some people, it does become a disabling condition, which means they will need those additional supports and information. And so I think that the Disability Hub can still be, whether you consider yourself disabled or not, if you need help and support, even to get better, you're a good place to go. You can learn about housing, you can learn about, even benefits. I will say one of the kind of uh, most wonderful things that happened was the Affordable Care Act, because Medicaid expansion really allowed, especially young people with a mental illness, to get the insurance that they need because they don't have any money, without proving that they can't work. And we really want people to work if they can, right? And so being able to get Medicaid without having to say, I'll never work again, or I won't, do productive employment, was really incredibly helpful. And so people were able to get the very treatment that they needed to go to work, which really worked. So, but I think that's some of the confusion, is they're like, but I'm not disabled. It's like, you need help and support, so you can still go to the Disability Hub.
Yeah, and you had mentioned when you were talking about the services that NAMI provides, you were talking about, you used the word navigating, and I'm very proud to share that service with you at the Hub. That's something that we do too, and I know that navigation of the systems and the supports are incredibly important. A question that has come in for us is, are there any opportunities for people to get involved or to volunteer with NAMI of Minnesota?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, a little hard still under the pandemic because we can't have
Sure.
in-office volunteers, but volunteers lead our support group. So if you are a person living with a mental illness or have a family member, we are always looking for people to help with that. We also use volunteers, especially family members, to teach what's called Family to Family class. It's a nationwide program, 8 weeks. Most people, frankly, on their evaluation say that it changed their life because they really understood then how to help their loved one. Honestly, people get really bad information from friends and families, things like you should use tough love, you should kick them out of your basement. We wouldn't do that for any other healthcare condition. People aren't enablers for mental illness. People are their life support, honestly. So, and so at least through Family to Family, you can get really good information about how to help your loved one. When we open back up again, we will be using volunteers for, even, helping with mailings, doing booths in the community. All of those kinds of things are still, we still need people for. And then I would say our legislative work, we really do rely on people to reach out and to call their legislators. We have a legislative committee that meets once a month that anyone can attend. And that would be another way for people to really get involved as well. Oh, and I should mention, we have the NAMI Walk, where We're hoping to be back in person. It's always the third Saturday in September. There are no registration fees. It's really the largest awareness raising event around mental health in Minnesota. And we always need lots of volunteers for that event.
An amazing opportunity. And I know personally, I have been incredibly fortunate to take the class offered by NAMI for Survivors Voices. And that is one way that I personally volunteer, is telling my story as a survivor of suicide loss. And life-changing is exactly one of the descriptive phrases I would use for that opportunity. So I know that NAMI offers excellent resources and support for families, and information out there. Wonderful, wonderful. Sue, is there anything that you'd like to share before we wrap up? Any last words?
So one thing, sometimes you hear on the community, people will say, our mental health system is broken. Our jails are the largest mental health facilities. And I just want to kind of correct that. Our mental health system is not broken. If you look at the history, state hospitals were not a system. State hospitals were, frankly, horrible, often institutions where we just left people. And so they closed for a reason. And the problem is that because of discriminatory public policies under Medicaid, Medicare, and private insurance, there just wasn't funding to build our mental health system. But over the last 40 some years, we've been able to identify what works and are really pushing to expand those services. And on the second issue, I would just like to say, so how much mental health care is being provided in the jail? So before we call it a mental health care facility, we need to be able to say that they're actually providing mental health treatment, which largely they're not. And we have worked very hard on police training, diversions from the criminal justice system. When, sometimes sheriffs will ask me, why are all these people with mental illness in the jails? And I say, well, who brought them there? It was the police, and they did have alternatives that they could have used. And yes, there are long waiting lists, and yes, we don't have enough resources, but I just firmly believe that if people share their stories, if they let their legislators know, what's needed and what we continue to build on, we will build that system. We have the framework. We just need to fill it in right now. And if anyone out there is struggling with their mental health, I know a lot of people don't like to make phone calls. And so I would just suggest that you text MN for Minnesota to 741-741. And thanks again for having me on today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Sue. We are incredibly grateful for your time today, and grateful for everybody that joined us and the team that's behind the scenes supporting Sue and I having this conversation with you. Now, this event will be available on our Facebook page as a video, and so we hope that you want to share it with others. We encourage you to do that. And if you want more information about NAMI, check out our links in the comments. And also, if you think this event was helpful, and we certainly hope that you do, I know that I have. I've enjoyed and feel very empowered hearing what Sue has shared with us today. And if you want to see more events like this, let us know that in the comments too. We're hoping to continue doing events like this, and want to continue improving the accessibility of these events. So any feedback about today's events, please leave those in our comments. Thank you again, Sue. Thank you to our team behind the scenes, and thank you to all of us, or all of you who have joined us today. We hope that you have a fabulous weekend, and we hope to see you again soon.